Japan's auto industry is facing a storm it hasn't seen in decades. The land of Toyota, Honda, and Nissan companies that once dominated the global market is now staring down massive job cuts. Why? Because U.S. electric vehicle policies are tilting the playing field in favor of Ford, and GM. Washington is putting billions of dollars on the table, subsidies, tax credits, and incentives that directly benefit American automakers, while making it harder for Japanese brands to compete. This isn't just about cars, it's about politics, economics, and the future of global mobility. For years, Japan's automakers thrived on fuel-efficient gasoline and hybrid models. They mastered reliability, efficiency, and affordability. But the U.S. has drawn a hard line. The future is electric, and if you're not building EVs in America with American labor and American supply chains, you're at a disadvantage. That's a direct strike at Japanese automakers, who've been slower to fully embrace EVs compared to their US and Chinese rivals. What does that mean on the ground? Job losses in Japan's domestic industry. Factories that once buzzed with activity are seeing orders dry up. Workers trained for decades on engines, transmissions, and traditional powertrains are suddenly finding those skills devalued. Reports suggest tens of thousands of positions could be at risk, not just in assembly lines, but across supply chains that support everything from steel to electronics. It's a domino effect that could ripple through the entire Japanese economy. Meanwhile, Ford and GM are being painted as the new champions of American innovation, with massive federal support backing their EV transition. They're securing battery supply chains, locking in subsidies, and expanding plants on U.S. soil. Japanese companies, on the other hand, are scrambling to catch up. Toyota is pouring billions into EV development. Honda is seeking joint ventures with American partners, but the gap is glaring. This isn't a race they can afford to lose, because once market share slips in the U.S., reclaiming it is nearly impossible. And here's the kicker. This isn't just about business competition, it's about geopolitics. The U.S. is deliberately shifting the auto landscape to weaken foreign dependence and strengthen domestic control. Japan, once America's biggest auto rival, is suddenly finding itself boxed out in the world's most profitable car market. The transition to EVs isn't gradual anymore, it's a full-blown reset button, and whoever controls it controls the future of transportation. Toyota, for instance, has long been the king of hybrids, but that crown doesn't mean much in an America obsessed with EV tax credits. They've announced huge investments, tens of billions into battery plants, EV production lines, and new models. But here's the problem. They're late to the party. Ford and GM are already rolling out EV trucks and SUVs that qualify for maximum credits, while Toyota is still trying to scale its first wave of pure electrics. That time gap could be devastating. Honda knows this too, which is why it's moving aggressively into partnerships. Its deal with GM to co-develop affordable EVs is a clear sign they don't want to fight alone. But again, the partnership puts them at the mercy of U.S. policy. If American regulators keep stacking the deck in favor of domestic brands, Honda risks becoming the junior partner in a market it once competed in head-to-head. And Nissan, once a pioneer with the Leaf, has lost momentum. The Leaf was supposed to be the EV revolution back in 2010. Fast forward to today, and Tesla has stolen the narrative. Ford is riding the EV truck wave, and GM is pushing into the mid-market. Nissan, despite being early, feels like it's playing catch-up in its own game. The looming shadow here isn't just Ford and GM either, it's China. Companies like BYD and NIO are advancing so quickly that the U.S. is already working to block them from direct entry. Japanese automakers are caught in the middle. If they can't align with U.S. policy and can't keep pace with Chinese innovation, they risk losing relevance in both markets. That's the nightmare scenario: squeezed by America, outrun by China, and stuck with an outdated playbook at home. This is why Japan's auto industry is facing a once-in-a-century disruption. The old strategy of dominating with hybrids and incremental efficiency upgrades won't cut it. The U.S. has rewritten the rules, and the clock is ticking for Japan to prove it can still lead in a game it once defined. Inside Japan, the pain is already being felt at the ground level. It's not just the big automakers like Toyota, Honda, or Nissan. It's the entire supply chain of smaller firms that depend on them. Think of the precision parts makers, the electronics suppliers, the metal fabricators. These companies have specialized for decades in components built for combustion engines, pistons, crankshafts, exhaust systems. In an EV, those parts simply don't exist. That means thousands of family-run businesses across Japan, many already struggling with aging workforces and shrinking margins, could be wiped out. We're talking about an industry that employs millions, directly and indirectly. If EV adoption accelerates under U.S. policy pressure, Japan could see a hollowing out of its industrial base. And that's not just jobs, it's expertise, craftsmanship, and the entire ecosystem that made Japanese cars world famous in the first place. Once those supply chains collapse, they're almost impossible to rebuild. Meanwhile, Washington's strategy is clear: lock in EV supremacy before rivals can catch up. By forcing automakers to build in America to qualify for subsidies, the U.S. is reshaping global investment flows. Factories that might have been built in Japan or Southeast Asia are now being redirected to states like Michigan, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Politicians are celebrating new jobs on American soil, but for Japan, this means fewer opportunities, less leverage, and a shrinking footprint in the very market they helped shape for decades. And here's where it gets even more dangerous for Japan. EVs aren't just about cars. They're about batteries, software, and data. Whoever dominates EV technology doesn't just sell vehicles, they control the next generation of mobility infrastructure. That means charging networks, grid integration, autonomous driving systems. Japan risks falling behind not just in sales, but in the entire technological foundation of the future auto world. On the human side, the shift is brutal. Imagine being a skilled engine technician in Nagoya who spent 25 years mastering the craft of precision machining. Overnight, that expertise is no longer needed because EVs don't use complex multi-part engines. Workers who once felt secure in lifelong employment, the hallmark of Japan's industrial culture, are suddenly facing uncertainty. Training programs are popping up, but retraining a mid-career workforce for software, battery tech, or robotics isn't simple. Many will be left behind. Families tied to these industries are already tightening belts. Entire towns in Japan have grown around auto plants. Local businesses, schools, and services all depend on factory workers' wages. When those jobs vanish, it's not just workers who suffer, it's communities. We've seen this story before in America's Rust Belt, but now it's Japan's turn to confront the same painful reality. And while workers in Japan are bracing for cuts, U.S. states are celebrating new EV plants opening with government-backed funding. The contrast couldn't be sharper: job creation in Detroit, job losses in Nagoya. It feels less like a market shift and more like a deliberate transfer of economic power. That's what makes this so explosive. But Japan isn't giving up without a fight. Toyota has pledged to accelerate its EV lineup, promising dozens of new models in the next decade. Honda is betting big on battery partnerships and even exploring solid-state battery breakthroughs. Nissan is trying to leverage its early EV experience to claw back relevance. Still, these moves take time, and time is the one resource Japan doesn't have. Every year that Ford and GM surge ahead with federal backing is a year Japanese firms fall further behind. Tokyo is starting to feel the heat, and the government knows the stakes couldn't be higher. Japan's auto industry isn't just another sector, it's the backbone of the nation's economy, accounting for a huge share of exports, manufacturing jobs, and technological prestige. So, policymakers are scrambling to cushion the blow. Subsidies for EV development are being expanded, research into next-generation batteries is being accelerated, and partnerships with domestic energy companies are being pushed hard. But here's the problem: Japan is playing defense while the US and China are playing offense. Washington has written policies that guarantee American automakers a head start. Beijing has been pouring money into its EV industry for more than a decade, creating giants like BYD that can pump out affordable EVs at scale. Tokyo, on the other hand, is trying to protect an old system while simultaneously building a new one. That's like trying to renovate a house while it's already on fire. The pressure is forcing Japanese automakers into some tough choices. Do they double down on hybrids, a field where they're unmatched, and hope global demand for hybrids stretches out longer than predicted? Or do they go all in on EVs, knowing they're years behind and will have to spend billions just to catch up? It's a high-stakes gamble either way, and neither path guarantees survival in the U.S. market. And then there's the elephant in the room: China. While Ford and GM are being boosted by Washington, Chinese automakers are expanding aggressively into Europe, Southeast Asia, and Latin America with low-cost EVs that are often packed with advanced tech. If the U.S. keeps its doors closed to Chinese brands, guess who becomes the prime target? Japanese automakers. They'll face direct competition in nearly every market outside America, where subsidies don't shield them. That's a two-front war, competing against U.S. giants in one arena and Chinese disruptors in another. China's rise in the EV sector is nothing short of explosive. Companies like BYD are already outselling Tesla in some markets, offering EVs that are not only cheaper but also loaded with cutting-edge features. And unlike Japan's cautious rollout, China is flooding the market with variety from budget city cars to luxury SUVs. That's bad news for Japanese automakers who built their legacy on reliability and value, because now China is offering both, plus affordability, at a pace Japan can't match. If this trend continues, Japan risks losing its foothold in key global markets. Southeast Asia, once a stronghold for Japanese brands, is already seeing an influx of Chinese EVs. Even Europe, where Toyota and Honda once had loyal followings, is tilting toward Chinese imports backed by aggressive pricing. It's a silent invasion of markets Japan once dominated, and every lost sale chips away at the global influence that kept Japan's auto industry at the top for decades. The danger isn't just in sales numbers, it's in perception. For years, Japanese cars were the gold standard of engineering excellence. Now, if consumers around the world start to see Chinese EVs as the smarter, more affordable choice, that brand prestige evaporates. And once a reputation is lost in the auto industry, it rarely comes back. Just ask Detroit in the 1980s, when Japanese imports reshaped America's car culture. That's why some Japanese automakers are considering radical strategies. Joint ventures with foreign firms, increased EV production outside Japan, and even sourcing technology from overseas startups are all on the table. For an industry that once prided itself on independence and in-house innovation, this is a humbling shift. But survival may depend on breaking old habits and moving faster than ever before. One of the biggest comeback cards Japan is holding is technology, and at the center of that is the much-hyped solid-state battery. For years, Japanese automakers and research labs have been pouring resources into this breakthrough, promising batteries that charge faster, last longer, and are far safer than today's lithium-ion packs. If Japan can crack solid-state ahead of the competition, it could flip the script almost overnight. Imagine EVs with ranges of 600 miles, charging in minutes instead of hours. That's the kind of game-changer that could put Toyota, Honda, and Nissan back in the driver's seat. But here's the catch: solid-state batteries are still experimental, costly, and difficult to manufacture at scale. While Japan pushes forward, China is perfecting mass production of conventional EV batteries, grabbing market share right now. The question is, will Japan's bet on future technology pay off in time, or will they miss the present wave while chasing the next one? Meanwhile, political tension is brewing. Tokyo is quietly frustrated with Washington's EV policies, which they see as unfairly protectionist. Japan is supposed to be one of America's closest allies, yet its automakers are being boxed out of U.S. subsidies. Behind the scenes, Japanese officials are lobbying for exemptions and trade adjustments, but so far, Washington is sticking firm. The Biden administration wants American jobs, American factories, and American dominance in the EV sector, and that leaves Japan in a tough spot diplomatically. This tension could spill into larger trade issues. If Japan feels cornered, it might retaliate with its own policies to protect domestic manufacturers, or strengthen ties with Europe and Southeast Asia to balance against U.S. pressure. And that introduces a whole new layer, the auto industry becoming not just a business rivalry but a geopolitical chess match. Japanese automakers are starting to realize that survival isn't just about building EVs, it's about redefining their entire identity. For decades, brands like Toyota and Honda built their reputation on efficiency, durability, and value. But in an EV-dominated world, those qualities alone won't be enough. Now the conversation is about software integration, seamless connectivity, autonomous driving, and even how cars interact with smart cities and energy grids. That's a very different game, and one where Japan has to play catch-up fast. Younger consumers in the US and Europe don't just want a car, they want a rolling piece of technology that feels more like an iPhone on wheels. That's why Tesla, despite its issues, still dominates mindshare. Ford and GM are leaning into this shift with software updates, digital services, and subscription features. Meanwhile, Japanese automakers are struggling to shake off the old image of being practical but boring. If they don't evolve their brand identity soon, they risk losing the next generation of drivers entirely. That's why we're seeing a push into partnerships with tech companies. Honda's deal with Sony to build smart EVs is a prime example. It's an acknowledgement that hardware expertise isn't enough anymore. Toyota is experimenting with mobility-as-a-service platforms, Looking at how cars can be part of a larger ecosystem of transportation solutions, these moves show that Japan understands the new rules. But again, execution speed is everything. The EV revolution is moving at breakneck pace, and hesitation is costly. At the same time, Japan's automakers can't ignore their domestic market. Japanese consumers have been slower to adopt EVs, preferring hybrids and smaller, fuel-efficient models. That creates a split strategy: cater to home demand with hybrids while trying to compete abroad with EVs. But splitting focus is dangerous. It stretches resources thin and could leave Japan behind in both markets. Japan's cultural and consumer habits make this transition even more complex. In a country where cities are compact, public transit is world-class, and driving distances are shorter, the urgency for long-range EVs isn't the same as in the US or Europe. Hybrids and even K-cars, small, affordable vehicles, still dominate the streets of Tokyo and Osaka. For Japanese buyers, practicality and affordability matter more than having the latest EV tech. That's why Toyota's Prius and Honda's hybrid lineup continue to sell well at home, even as the global market shifts. But the risk here is obvious. If Japanese automakers spend too much energy catering to domestic tastes, they risk falling out of step with the international market. The US and China are not just adopting EVs, they're shaping global standards, building battery supply chains, and writing the software rules that will define the next generation of cars. Japan can't afford to be a follower because once those standards are set, catching up becomes nearly impossible. So where does this leave Japan's auto industry? On the edge of a massive transformation. Job cuts are inevitable, communities will face disruption, and the old model of success built on hybrids and reliable gas engines is fading fast. The US is securing its future with aggressive EV policies, China is flooding markets with affordable, tech-packed vehicles, and Japan is caught in the middle, forced to either reinvent itself or risk irrelevance. The road ahead is brutal, but not hopeless. If Japanese automakers can deliver on solid-state batteries, leverage their unmatched engineering discipline, and embrace bold partnerships in software and technology, they still have a shot at reclaiming leadership. But hesitation is no longer an option. The EV era is here, and the race to define the future of mobility has already begun. The question now is simple: will Japan rise to the challenge, or will the giants of yesterday fade into the background of tomorrow's electric age?